Chris Saunders, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well.
Excellent.
I just what we were talking about. I had this jaw harp when I was in college, okay? And I would walk around. I was going to school in Berkeley, and the jaw harp's that classic, like bluegrass washboard band kind of like, and it's, shaped literally like a little harp, and it's metal, and it's got this little twang thing. And you're supposed to, I don't know how people did it. They're supposed to put it on their teeth. I had to go like this because it would vibrate. I know. But when you're living in the South and you have 3 teeth, then I don't think you really care.
It's what you do.
Yeah, right. You probably lost your 2 side ones, so it just fits right in there. And it's like, and it was funny because people would hear it, and it's this real classic kind of like Southern sound. And people walking around Berkeley playing the jaw harp, just messing around, going to class. People would look at you like real funny because instantly they're like, who the hell is this dude? What is he doing? Yeah, right. And, again, I asked you to come in because I met you first because you came in with Sheriff Clifford to talk about the implicit bias training that you guys run, among other things. And then you very kindly invited me to one of the trainings. It was this 4-hour training. You were super awesome and got me my own pot of coffee.
Absolutely.
God bless it.
That's what we do.
And I've been thinking about it since because your articulation of the importance of understanding bias did not spend 1 second going over classic implicit bias understanding that I had, which is like somebody who's African-American is going to, have to wait 3 more seconds at a Starbucks than somebody who's Caucasian American. It was not anything like that. It was, hey, we have biases in the way we address people, in the way we promote people, in the way we deal with calls that we receive. And just thinking about the jaw harp, I was like, that was it. People would hear the jaw harp and they would make assumptions about who I was or what I was doing there. I was going to math class, man. I was like an idiot 19-year-old going to math class. And that's what you guys try to focus on.
Absolutely. When we started the program, a little over 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I went and immersed myself in what was out there, the programs that were available. In fact, the agency actually purchased a program, did a, whole train the trainer module and got some of us trained up. And it was actually a phenomenal training that I went to. The problem was it was 24 hours long. It was a 3-day, 8-hour-a-day training.
That's a lot of bias training.
It is. Yeah. And it was really good. And it was very law enforcement centric. It's put on by one of the leaders in law enforcement training in our country. The problem is I don't get 24 hours to have those conversations. I negotiated up to 4, but we started at 2. And so the problem that we had from the get-go was how do I represent all of this information that is rich and I think tells a better story in a very constricted timeline. And so we went through the agency the first round, got, everybody trained up in it. And the feedback was mixed because I think it left a lot to be desired. We couldn't possibly take 24 hours worth of material and synthesize it down into 2 or even 4 hours. And so we decided we needed to take a different approach. We needed to take a broader approach. In addition to the amount of information we were trying to mush into this 4 hours, is there was a whole part of the agency that felt completely left out of the conversation. And it was our professional staff, our non-commissioned staff.
You have like 800 people, roughly 800 in Ada County Sheriff. Yeah. But only 400 are like commissioned deputies, right? Like the others are literally like, oh, I'm Janice, like I work at the front, or like I'm Bill, I work like what? Like there are plenty of professionals that are like, wait, what? This has nothing to do with me.
Absolutely. I mean, our agency's almost 50-50 split. And so we saw a couple of gaps. We saw a gap in half of our agency getting applicable information because so much of what's out there is about force. It's about use of force. And I've been with the agency almost 15 years. Haven't gone hands-on one time in my career, and I hope to keep it that way, you know? And so there was that piece, but then there was also this, there's a bigger conversation to have about this topic. And I thought, we can actually, this is a two birds with one stone kind of situation where we can take this conversation to another level, but do it in a way that it's applicable to everybody in our agency. And the answer to that was psychology, with the whole, where all of this comes from. And you got, hopefully you kind of walked away from that going, man, I just did this 4-hour class and I feel like I got a little bit of a psychology 101 refresher on where does this come from?
Right.
Because when you take it down to that level, when you take it down to just the basics of this topic, cognitive bias, as we talk about in the class, you walk away from that experience going, well, yeah, I've totally done that before. I've totally gone to a restaurant, had a horrible experience, and walked out and said, I'm never coming back here again. Congratulations. That's a bias. We've all done that. And so I think when you take it down to that level, it actually makes the topic much more, people are much more willing to have that conversation. When you walk in and your preconceived notion is that the instructor is going to tell you how racist you are, how sexist you are, how homophobic you are, well, of course, everybody's going to come up with walls. Everybody's going to come up and be like, I'm here to prove you wrong. You got 4 hours and I'm going to spend that whole time proving you wrong. Instead, the feedback that I get when we deliver this curriculum almost universally is, that's not what I expected this class to be like. And that was a lot of what you had as well when you left.
100%. When actually it was very, it was interesting when I left, because I realized how cognizant and worried about bias I am in my everyday life, but not in any of, like, I don't worry about people being like, oh, Matt's a racist. And somebody says it, I'm like, whatever, man. Like, sure. I'm not interested in, like, it doesn't even warrant a response. But there are biases that I'm very worried about with looking at myself and with people observing it. For instance, I'm a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and it took me years to get that. And I've been a black belt for a long time. I've been a black belt over 10 years now. And I will meet people that are just starting in jiu-jitsu that will treat me with a level of deference and respect, and they'll treat me differently than they would treat another white belt or another blue belt. And I'm like, buddy, listen, like, thanks for being polite on the mat, but like, I'm just another idiot. I just happen to have been doing this for a long time. Like, I'm not a better person than you. I'm not smarter than you. I'm not, like, don't have that bias. And in fact, yeah, be respectful within the confines of the jiu-jitsu training, but outside of that, like, don't idolize black belts, because they're just as dumb and stupid and like bad cooks and stuff like that's. But again, when you start in jiu-jitsu, that's a concern that people have. And it's like, don't do that. Yeah. That's the wrong way to, because like, they just happen to know something that you want to know. It would be the same as if I was like a world champion dart player or dart thrower. I don't know what it's like. Okay, does that make me an inherently better person? Absolutely not. Everybody understands that. They're like, you probably drink a lot too, because you're hanging out in bars. Yes, exactly. Yeah, right. But if you really want to be great at darts and you're like, okay, I'm starting my dart journey, and you meet some world champion dart thrower and you're like, oh wow, this guy's incredible. It's like, no, dude, he's just a dude that plays darts. And from a professional standpoint outside of jiu-jitsu, I realized that I very much check myself with false attribution bias, because I realize that I have a very specific skill set in education. I was like, I'm really good at tutoring 16 and 17-year-olds. Like, put me in front of a 16 or 17-year-old, sure. Math, grammar, history, doesn't matter. We'll have a great time. Absolutely. Like, we're going to rock and roll. But I never thought that because I was good at tutoring, I would be good at opening a tutoring center, which is what everyone said. They're like, oh my gosh, you're doing really well at this. Back when I was in my 20s, like, you should open a center. I'm like, that's a completely different thing, right? Like, if I'm a doctor and I'm really good at general surgery, or I'm a really good hand surgeon, are you going to tell me to open a hospital? No, like, I'm really good at this thing. I'm only good. And I had never articulated that as a set of biases or warding against bias in my life.
Absolutely. And that's, I think that's really what the curriculum is meant to help pull out of people and just give them a way of looking at things that maybe they haven't before. We give them names. There's obviously, in the field of psychology, there's over 180 forms of bias that have been researched and discovered and named and whatnot. And we pull out the 10 most common, at least from my experience in teaching this class and working law enforcement for almost 15 years. What are we likely to see? What are those types of biases that are most likely to affect us in the work that we're trying to do, in our interaction with the citizens, in delivering a high level of service, whatever those are, and then providing those real world examples of what does that look like? What could that look like? And if we allow that to control our behavior, what sort of consequences may come from that's, allowing that bias to dictate what it is that we're doing. One of the examples I give in the class that's really resonated with a lot of the folks that have taken the class is an example that I actually had given to me by one of our patrol officers. And he tells this story. He's patrolling, I believe it was in the south part of our county, sort of South Ada County, and gets a call for a domestic in progress. So a very high priority call. He's going to go lights and sirens and get there. And so as he's traveling, he sees the address and immediately recognizes the address as a place that he'd actually responded to before. He sees the apartment number show up, and he's actually responded to this apartment for a domestic call, not 6 months prior. So he remembers going on that call. He remembers what happened. He remembers the situation. And so as he's driving to this scene to handle, this call that's come in, he's already got a picture in his head of what he's about to experience. He arrives, goes in the parking lot, goes up to the second story, walks into the apartment, only to find out that the woman in this scenario actually fought back and caused some pretty severe damage to her boyfriend at the time, who was in fact perpetrating the domestic violence. And he talks about that experience having to have a bit of a mental reset, because that's not what he anticipated seeing. Again, he'd been on that call before, not just that call, but with that perpetrator in that apartment before. He knew in his head exactly what was going to happen. And he walks in, and it was the exact opposite of what he expected. He recovered quickly, handled the situation. All was well and good, and was handled as it needed to be. But he tells that story as a great example of what we call the recency effect. It's that most recent thing that he experienced affected how he was going to respond to that next thing, only to find out that it was wrong. In our world, kind of the example I gave you earlier, we've gone to a restaurant and had a really bad experience.
Right.
Does that give you a statistical likelihood that experience will be replicated the next time? Probably not. But for us, that was our last experience, and we're not going to go back again because
that restaurant's trash. Before.
Exactly.
Yeah. What outside of deputies, when you're dealing with a 400-person essentially professional office,
yeah,
what are the big things that you guys see with bias within that organization? Is it essentially hiring and firing, or promoting? Like, this person's really good at this particular job, let's promote them up to manager, and then you realize, like me, I've always considered myself a specialist. It's like I'm an operator. I'm really good at engaging in a task and completing that task at a very, very high quality with high efficiency. I do not know how to help someone else along a task. I don't know how to delegate. I've never had employees. I've never had coworkers. It's like, I am 100% an operator, right? Do you guys worry about, like, what are the big things like that? Is it finding the right leaders amongst, operators and making sure you don't promote the wrong people, or what is it?
So to answer that question, I'll have to give you a little bit of data. I know that's surprising coming from me, that I'm going to give you some numbers.
It's wild.
I know, right? You never suspected that. When I look at that, I look at forward-facing customer service, and there's a reason for that. You think of the most visible part of our agency is our patrol, right? Our Tahoes. Everybody's seen our Tahoes. You got our logo on the side. That's the most visibly recognizable arm of our agency.
But I don't interact with them.
But you hopefully,
right.
You're not interacting.
I wave. I always wave
very often. But who does get a lot of interaction? Our dispatch center, to the tune of 500,000 calls a year. How about our driver's license? You think of an administrative function that's part of the sheriff's responsibility. We do anywhere between 220 and 250,000 transactions a year. We go on about 90,000 calls for service. So just look at your numbers there. So when you have that in your mind, it would make sense that the number one thing that we have these conversations for is our interaction with the public. It's interacting, engaging, and communicating with an increasingly diverse population, not just diverse in terms of race, ethnicity, where they came from,
right,
but a diversity in perspectives, a diversity in opinions, a diversity of languages. We've instituted language translation at our driver's license office because it actually helps to expedite our service delivery to the thousands of customers that come in. and don't have the ability to speak, the language that we're speaking. When they do their tests, it's a different scenario. But when we're having just an interaction with them at our window, we want to make those equally those transactions equally expedited as we do for folks that are speaking English or the other languages that we offer. So with all that in mind, what we're trying to give folks that training and that education is we interact with the public a ton. We have a lot of interaction in our professional areas of the agency. And so we want you to recognize how somebody coming in that might trigger something in you that you didn't even realize was there has the potential of affecting the way that you interact with that member of the public. And when you're doing the job, as we're a service industry, we're providing a service, that high level of customer service is an expectation that we all have.
Yeah, man, you guys go through a lot of people. I obviously had to go get my driver's license,
Sure.
and it was a painless process, right? Like it went well. I got an appointment and was there on time and everything. So it was a very professional exchange, right? I had a fine time with it, but it's not always like that, right? Like I've been at government agencies that are not like that in the least. So I was aware, I was like, wow, and everybody's wearing, the Ada County Sheriff polo and everything. I was aware there was like, this is a pretty well-oiled machine. Like these people are pumping through a lot of individuals. I had a very funny experience 2 months ago. Okay. I was engaged. I can't be very, very specific, but I was engaged in a business exchange with an older gal.
Okay.
And we were meeting somewhere, and for whatever reason, I was like, she's kind of been slow with communication. Like, is this person really interested or not? Okay. She was buying something.
Okay.
And we had set up a time and a place to meet, and I'm standing around for like 10, 20 minutes. And I'm like, hey, I'm here. Like, what's going on? And then I get a phone call, and she's like, well, I got lost on my iPhone. I'm like, okay, if you have an iPhone, you literally just put in the direction. She's like, well, I turned early. I was like, why? The iPhone tells you when to turn.
Siri didn't say turn left.
And so this whole time I'm like, is this lady for real? And I keep getting worried that it's like somebody just yanking my chain or like whatever, right? And I wasn't worried about getting mugged or anything. I was just like, is this person for real or what's going on? And it had turned out that it genuinely was, she was an older gal for whatever, that was doing this thing. And there was no scamminess involved at all. But my entire anxiety stemmed from her, one, inability to find the place on time, and two, her slow communication.
Sure.
And those two things for me were like, I was already like, like, what are you doing? Like, am I getting taken here? Like, what's happening?
Yep.
And it was so funny. It's like, what is going on with me? Like, why are these two things so fundamental to me? It should be easy for you to understand how to get somewhere because you have an iPhone and you text totally fine. Like, why is it taking you so long to text and get back to me? Because, everybody gets taken on like Craigslist.
Of course.
But
absolutely.
Anyway, the point is, those were my two things that led me to already have like really negative assumptions about this woman who was totally operating in good faith. She's just not great with directions and she's slow to text back. Like that was it.
Absolutely.
Like, and to see that in myself, to imagine dealing with different languages, different abilities to work through paperwork and whatnot, especially at a driver's license area. It's like, man, what a train wreck. Like I would not be a good employee. I would be like, everybody's out to get me. Like these people are messing with me. I'd freak out, I'm sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing.
I love that you agree. You're like, oh yeah, for sure.
Oh,
you would not be a good employee.
Well,
like, listen, I said it, Chris. Okay.
Okay, you said it. I simply agreed with you. That's all. Nothing more, nothing less. But no, when you get those preconceived notions and then you start making decisions based on information that you've put together that may not be true. So look, take that to its logical end, right? So this person can't find you. She's lost, made all these right turns. Right. She's not communicating with you. You're like, forget this. I'm out.
Yeah. She's obviously a scammer. Yeah. She's out to get me.
And then she shows up, but you don't know that because you've already left.
Right.
You just missed out on a transaction.
Right.
Okay. Right. Well, that's your loss in the end.
Right.
But what led to that loss were those preconceived notions that you connected pieces that actually shouldn't have been connected.
Right. I got a certain stimulus, and because that stimulus was inherently tied to an assumption that came along with it. It's like,
Sure.
she's slow with texting, she's messing with me.
Yes, absolutely.
Maybe she has fat thumbs. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? We talk about that with hiring, right?
Yeah.
As in my role, I have a team that I manage and hire folks. When I have folks promote or leave or whatnot. And I have my own set of biases when it comes to the hiring process. And it's something I have to be very aware of because I'm very quick to slough somebody off if they hit one of my things. If you don't ask me a question, right? At the end of an interview, do you have any questions for us? No, not really. You might be the best candidate in the world. And I'm like, nope, not a chance.
Gosh.
It's a me thing.
That's good to know for my interview next
Right.
week.
Yeah, exactly. When you show up and in the event that we hire anytime
I have a
soon,
list of
just like,
questions.
there you go. But again, it's the awareness piece, right?
Right.
The whole point of us teaching it is for those awarenesses to have. Somebody shows up late to an interview, it's really easy for us to label them as unprofessional and always going to be late and all of that. And that might very well be true. They might have also just had car trouble. They might have had a tough time dropping their 5-year-old off at kindergarten. They just didn't want to go to school that day, and they needed a little extra dad time or a little extra mom time, right? And that's the point. It's like when we're dealing with people, we owe them at least some semblance of, hey, maybe the way I see it isn't actually how it is. It's trying to open people up to the possibility that the perception that we have, the conclusion that we draw, might not actually be what's going on. It's supposed to like broaden your perspective, to think outside the box, to use a, colloquial term that's been, severely overused, but yes, absolutely. Think outside the box. Think about some other potentials that could be going on that maybe you could then be better in that moment.
Right.
Think about that family that's freaking out at the window in records because they have a family member that just went to jail. And that the clerk behind has processed thousands of bonds, in his or her time in their job. But this is the first time this family's done that, and they're hysterical and they don't know what to do.
Right.
Express a little bit of empathy for them, because in our world, we generally deal with people on the worst days of their life.
Right.
It's just that perspective. Like, we know what we do because we're highly trained and we do it over and over and over again. This general public doesn't interact with us on their best days.
No, and the bias works really both ways. Like, I noticed this the other day. I'm up to date on my tags. There's nothing wrong with my car. My blinkers work. Everything's fine. And I was driving down the street, and here comes the black, Tahoe behind me. And even I'm like, oh no. And it was like, I haven't done, like, I have not had a single bad experience with an Ada County Sheriff's deputy or the sheriff. Everyone I've spoken with that has had experiences with them, overwhelmingly, like, these people are fantastic, right? And that includes other law enforcement agents that had just moved here. Like, these are the best cops I've ever seen, right? But even I'm like, oh no, like, oh, this is going to be bad. And then you see one actually example that I was chatting with you about right before is the classic, like, cell phone video of a law enforcement officer yelling at kids who are, like, skateboarding on the street.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, you see it it's everywhere on TikTok.
Skateboarding's not a crime,
Yes.
right? Remember that when we were in
my
school,
gosh.
skateboarding's not a crime.
Right. And you'd see the guy, like, losing his mind. And there are all of these biases that go into that, where I'm watching the video and I'm like, look at this jerk police officer. But I really have no idea what has happened. Like, I watched the first 2 seconds. I'm like, and again, my point is, from a community member standpoint, I think it's very easy to criticize. One, you obviously got criticized, and so did Ada County Sheriff, for engaging in implicit bias training, because that concept has been bastardized so much to imply that you're, like, woke, out of touch, you're only concerned with identity politics, all this stuff, which is overwhelmingly not the case.
Not
and
true.
Again, I went to the training. You didn't talk about that for a second, aside from saying, we are not going to talk about this, right? And not only that, but it works both ways. The bias people have against law enforcement is also real. And Chief Bestachia had a great point, and so did Sheriff Clifford. Both of them talk about the reciprocity within the community. It's like the law enforcement agents try to deliver the best possible service, and the community delivers the best possible interaction. And because of that, you have these really good community connections, right? Not perfect. Nobody's perfect.
Not at all.
But you have good community connections. And the idea that, one, we should poo-poo on implicit bias, and two, it's only something that the actual professional should worry about. It's like, no, man, when you come into law enforcement, we should recognize that we have bias going towards these people, and it's not fair. And my brother-in-law is a law enforcement agent down in California, and I have so many friends that were law enforcement agents down there and either still are or have moved up here and either engaged in law enforcement or moved into something else. And it's like, dude, it's not like that uniform, that's still that dad, that's that guy you're hanging out with at the Little League game. Like, it's still Chief Ingram from Caldwell.
Yeah.
His kids and my kids used to go to the same school. It's like, he's the best. I love that guy.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And I think that's, one of those takeaways that we always end in the class with is sort of like, what do we do with this? Right. We spend all this time talking about these concepts and these terms and applying them to ourselves. And now we've got all this stuff. And again, you've sat in the classes, like, what do we do with this? And a lot of the feedback that I get continuously when I teach these classes is, why are we not having this conversation with the public? Right. When we started, like, we did the class, it wasn't a huge thing. Nobody else was doing it in Idaho. We were kind of the first that brought this. It's now a post-required class that they have in the academy, so you have to take it. But still, it's still this kind of, well, it's just for us, right?
Right.
We invited you to come and see it, because I think that truly is our next step. Our next step, and if we truly want to solve that the interaction between law enforcement and the community, there's a conversation that needs to happen between those two entities, right? And that in the end, we actually have a lot more in common than we have in different, but it takes the facilitation of that conversation. Like, we got to talk about it. It's what we're doing here, right? We're pulling the covers off even more than we already have of, this is what this is all about. We don't have anything to hide.
By the way, whenever I get invited somewhere like that, or I've been to like an election summit and other places, whenever somebody's like, okay, and this is Brian and this is Boom, and everybody's like, hey, Brian, and they're like, and that's Matt. He runs a podcast. You can see people be like, motherfucker, because it's always like, what is he doing here? Like, nobody wants me there. And it's like, sure. I'm not a bad person.
Right. But what was,
I mean, I'm not a good person, but I'm not a bad person.
You're closer to the good than
I'm moderate.
Moderate. Yes. But I look back at that class that we did when you were there, and the great thing about how that takes place, and I don't know if you experience this. Obviously, I've done a lot of them, so I've got a lot to compare between. But your presence in that class of my coworkers, essentially, that I'm teaching, did not inhibit the conversation at all. Yeah. Did not inhibit the discussion at all. In fact, a lot of them appreciated your perspective because it's giving them an outsider's perspective of the thing we're talking about. And I mean, outsider in so much that you don't work for the agency.
Sure. I'm an outside entity.
But you're a community partner in the same way that we all live in this community and work in this community. And so it's just, for me, it gives me a lot of hope that this conversation is going to keep going when I can invite you and I can invite some other community folks in that have done over the years. And the conversation still happens. Right. Those things still happen. It's like, even our people, like, they want to have that conversation. They want to be able to be like, guys, this is what we do. Right. Like, we're one of over 3,000 law enforcement agencies in the country, and there's a lot more out there than just us, but come and look at what we're doing, because we're proud of what we're doing. Right.
Yeah. I mean, look, I haven't even been here 3 years yet, but every single time I've interacted with the sheriff, I was down at the Harvest Festival down in Eagle a few weeks back, and I met the new chief of police. He was fantastic.
Yeah, he's awesome.
He was great. Like, again, had this long, I felt bad because he kept talking to me, and my kid was, pulling on my arm. I was I would like to talk to you. I gotta go, but again, they're out there walking around, talking to people. And I only bumped into him because my kid ran up to him and was talking to him. And he was like, tell me about soccer, kid. And I liked soccer too. He's a big old guy.
Big soccer guy. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And he's also very large. I was like, I can't imagine you playing soccer. You're a big man. Yeah. It is one of those things that I think that the national narrative with some of the better functionings of Idaho have really put those functions under a lot of pressure, right? Like we had, and I'm not looking for your commentary on this at all. I'm just going to speak for myself. But when I saw the issue that happened in, with older gentlemen looking through a policeman's window, and he's going to drop off old medications, and there was like, "Hey, what are you doing out here?" And then all of a sudden, the story plays out as everybody knows. It did not go well for the older gentleman, and he genuinely, to my knowledge, there was no nefarious action or intent. And again, I'm not asking you to comment at all. It's like, okay, but what do we do if we're looking to avoid these types of things, right? And how do we engage with this? Well, we need to engage in this conversation of how we react to the public, how we respond to people, how we, maybe check some of our anxieties. And I have no idea what was going on with those law enforcement agents. They could have come back from like the worst call in their entire life, and they just look out the window and like they're already at a 10, which is always a crisis and a concern with law enforcement agents, that they're doing such difficult work. And then we ask them to be like smiley and happy. It's like, this is a difficult thing. But I just don't like that. I don't like the national narrative making it more difficult to do what we should do in Idaho, right? And implicit bias training, as I've experienced it through your agency and as I've thought about it personally, it's like, this is really important. This is a really important thing, not just for our deputies, but for the professional workers within the agencies. It's important for, just interactions at the DMV, essentially. Like, it's important everywhere. And that it comes under fire because some ding dong somewhere was like, I know all white people are racist. It's like, that's not helping anyone here.
Nope. That's not moving us closer to a resolution.
Right.
I love the point in terms of, the national narrative can tend to take over. And, in small town Boise and small town Ada County, we get this national narrative that so many people distance themselves from, like, oh, we're not like them, or we're not, like this or that.
Right.
But then my question always is, as again, going back to the data side, is what are we then? We actually commissioned a study from Boise State and our Idaho Policy Institute, run through Boise State, to do a community survey. The sheriff in our budget presentation this year mentioned some of the early results that we had, from that study.
Yeah.
It was, a huge telephonic survey. They actually did 4 focus groups off of that as well to really dive into these things. And it's, we're still going through everything. It's a 57-page report. There's a lot to it and whatnot. But we got so much valuable information from that for this thing that we've not done for over 15 years, this community survey, and asking for that feedback from not just our, areas, not just Eagle Star, Cuna, it's just the whole county. Because at the end of the day, it's us in the jail. Like, we're running the jail for everybody. If you want a driver's license, it's us. That's the only place to go, right? And so we're going through that data and really finding there's a lot of support in our community. There's a lot for all law enforcement in general. Do they have things that we can do better? In their opinion, do they have opinions for us of where we can get better? Absolutely, as they should. And that's feedback, that we receive, that we want to have. And the feedback, even in that, is really positive. I'll give you kind of a quick rundown. So looking at our area specifically, when we ask our citizens, what can we do to improve? The top 2 answers were, I don't know and nothing. So that's good. That's good. But when you get into some,
number 3 was blank.
No, yeah, number 3
number
was
4.
No, right? But when you get into the next 3 answers, it's more presence in the community, more officers on the street, and do a better job dealing with traffic. When the things that we can do better involve us being more engaged in our community, I'm going to tell you that's a good thing. Yeah. Should we work on those things? Sure. I think we'd all like to see, those things that our citizens mentioned. I think those are fair statements that most people would probably agree with.
Yeah.
But when the things that we can do as an agency to improve is to be more engaged and involved in our communities, to me, that debunks the national narrative applying here, because that's not what's going on at the national level. It's less. Right. We don't want you. Our community is saying that's not at all what we want. Right. We want to continue living in a safe community. And we recognize that means we might need you guys to get a little bit more involved in what's going on.
God bless it, man. That's great to hear. Talk about community bias with the the jail bond, right? Everybody I talked to about the jail bond, because they knew that I had been chatting with Sheriff Clifford, and every single person's like, let those criminals like sleep on the floor. I'm like, okay, like if you get arrested for something, you're innocent until proven guilty. So like you could have people that are literally arrested for something that and I'm sure the sheriff does a good job of not arresting in bad situations or inadequate situations, but it's like, there's absolutely a possibility that person could go in front of a judge and judge like, yeah, no, you're not good. Like, go away. Like, you're fine. So this person is just eating crumbs and sleeping on the floor as an innocent. That's not the way that they should be treated. Not only that, like, this is not the bias of, these people need to experience difficulty because I dislike them or they've broken the law. Like, first off, people still deserve dignity. And second, your bias towards disliking them will bleed into making the people that work for Ada County Sheriff's lives way worse.
Absolutely.
Like, way worse, way more dangerous, not just harder, but dangerous.
Absolutely.
Like, we want everybody who goes to the jail to work with those people to come home safely every day. And to hear the community or some community members that I spoke with just so biased towards like, we need to make criminals pay. It's like, okay, well, first off, they're not convicted. They're not all convicted criminals yet. And some of them may turn out to be innocent. And two, you're really making a lot more people than just those people pay. Like, that's a pretty unreasonable position to have.
Absolutely.
At least it seemed that way to me.
Well, and then you go one step further. If you look at our jail data each and every year, and I have the benefit of being able to dive into that at a pretty deep level, we don't have a huge problem in Ada County with new people committing crime. You know what our problem is? It's the same people committing crime, which means they're not getting any better. They're not, a term that's used in criminal justice is desistance. They're not desisting from their criminal behavior. And if, I look at, if we want to make a community safer, that's one of the things that we can really focus on is helping our folks, whatever help looks like, because there's a multitude of ways.
Right.
But helping those folks choose something different in their life, to start doing, something different than they have been. We look at our jail data all the time and look at, what percentage of our, 10,000-ish bookings each year are people that we've had before. And it's always well over 50%. It's usually up in the 80% range that, yep, we've seen them before, meaning we're not assigning them a new jail number, right?
They get the same number?
They get the same numbers. But that's important for us when we look at we look at community safety. We look at how can we make this community safer? It's looking at the people who we've seen before and trying to figure out what is it that we might be able to help you do as a law enforcement agency, as a jail, as an agency that really is committed to community safety. What can we do to help those people do something different? Because for every person that desists from crime, those are less victims. Those are less property crime victims that they're creating. They're less person crime victim, whatever it is, less drugs on the street, potentially, if we get people to get into recovery and maintain that recovery. So, again, looking at going back to the bias part of that conversation, right? The consequence of sleeping on the floor and eating breadcrumbs, the end result of that is not a safer community.
Right.
The end result of that is the same or worse in the end. And that's not what I want.
Right. I just published an episode today with a gal named Kelsey from Boise Rescue Mission, and she was talking about the New Life program and the emergency services that Boise Rescue Mission engages in. And these are people that are homeless or drug addicted or have come to all kinds of problems in their life. They're not leading a great, easy, good, thriving life. And her emphasis is like, look, we're going to get you squared away. Like, we're going to get you food. We're going to get you someplace to sleep. Like, we're going to take care of you, but we're also going to have a plan for you in 24 hours, right? Or within, I think she was talking about within 24 hours, they're going to sit down with the person and be like, okay, look, how did you get here? What do you need to get out? And she's like, some people, they just need a banging suit of clothes, clean clothes, a computer, and help applying for 40 different jobs that week.
Definitely.
Those people, it's great, done. Or is it somebody that needs rehab? Okay, we can work towards that. Is it somebody who, really just needs education? We have a great education program. And she was going off talking about these things, all the while emphasizing we don't enable a continuation of this bad behavior. And in fact, she said, it needs to get painful faster. You need to hit bottom faster, because once you hit the bottom, you can rebound and come back out and engage in productive, forward thinking, like progress. Essentially, it's like, look, okay, whatever. I got these 10 problems. I'm going to start like chipping away at them. And Boise Rescue Mission stands by these people. And that's, again, these are not criminals necessarily, right? Like,
Sure.
I mean, I know people are drug addicted, drugs are legal, but the point is that the emphasis is not on like, you're going to stay this way forever. The emphasis is, okay, you're here, you're not thriving. We need to fix this. What needs to be fixed? And that, especially with your data of like well over 50% of the people there are repeat offenders, like we need to figure out a way to train them or integrate them or engage them as a society so that we as a society are not footing the bill. First off, we're not prey to crime, but we're also not footing the bill to essentially just house them perpetually because they're not integrating back into the community. They're not producing anything. They're not helping anything, you know?
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense to take a solution oriented, approach to this.
Right.
What if anything can we solve? The work isn't something that we're going to do, right? For our clients, especially in that side of our operation, in our reentry services, in our transition center, all those areas of our operation that are designed to give these skills and these opportunities for folks to change their path. We don't do the work, right? The individual, the client, as we call them, is got to do the
I love
work.
that you call them clients. That's
right?
fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a stigma. Again, go back to bias, right? Clients, offenders. I mean, each word carries a little bit of a different connotation.
Yeah.
When at the end of the day, whether or not they do the programs that we have and the job search and all that, they're still shopping at the same stores that we're shopping at.
Right.
They're still their kids are going to school with our kids just like they were before. We all benefit from them having the opportunity to change something,
right?
To get back to doing those pro-social things.
Right. And if you don't, no matter what, if you do not figure out a way to integrate the people or help people integrate themselves or just give the support, you can give them bare bones existence and they're just going to be back next week. It ends up costing us way more money in the long run, and it robs us of productivity. Like everybody's talking about a labor shortage, right? Wouldn't it be better if we could get more people that, have struggled with engaging in consistent employment, get them trained and functioning in the world where they can engage? Like, great, we'll decrease our labor shortage. Like, that's awesome. We don't have to pay so much for an omelet or something, whatever it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard stories from our folks that work in the jail reentry and they've had clients go out and come back within a week, and every now and then they'll go and meet them in the jail, and it's just kind of like, what happened? What happened? I mean, you had the plan, you had everything, like what happened? Both from obviously a human perspective, like a lot of empathy, but also educational for us. Right. Like if we see the same thing happening over and over again, is there something we could do different in our operation? And you know what the consistent feedback is? They went back to doing the same old things. They went back to their same neighborhood with their same people. Yeah. And I'm like, not to minimize it as the story's the same every time. So it's not every time, but a good majority of the times that's the story you hear. And it's at the end of the day, I don't know how we change that. Right. Other than the education's there, we know that if you go do the same thing in the same place with the same people, you're likely end up getting the same result.
That's exactly what Kelsey from Boise Rescue was saying. She's like that one of the biggest things is removing people from their social environment. That's why they do like this inpatient program. Like, look, you're going to live here, you're going to stay here, we're going to feed you, you're going to work. Got to be up at 5 every morning, right? Because we're like, here we go. So it's not like you're sleeping until 8 a.m., somebody's bringing you guys. It's like, no, you're getting up and working. You're serving other people. That part of her story was so profound to me in that it's so clear. It's like, just give people a place. Give them a place. They want to be engaged. I don't know anybody I've ever met who's like, gosh, I got so much done today. That was terrible.
Yeah, exactly.
People are proud. And there are all kinds of problems around, especially in worse social situations with people engaging in productive, consistently productive lifestyles. But you take somebody who's addicted to drugs, who's homeless, who has a lot of pain, and it's like, okay, look, you're up every morning at 5 because like we got to get the kitchen ready for all these people, and then you're going to be doing this, and then you're going to go to, therapy, or we have that available, and then blah blah. And you were like, listen, you're not even going to have to think. We're going to take care of this. You're going to get the work done, and you're now part of the system, and that's such a beautiful thing to offer people. And I've had periods of my life where I've really felt like I don't have a place here. Like there's nothing, and it has not turned out well, right? Like when I first moved here, I did not have a job. I mean, I have this, but it's $0 an hour right now.
Right.
Right. But like, I didn't have a job. I didn't have an engagement. I didn't have value I was offering the community. And man, I ended up hanging out with people and just drinking a couple nights a week. Like we never got into trouble. We never left our street, but like it was terrible. Like I was staying up till 3 a.m. I was sleeping in. I wasn't sleeping well. All of a sudden I started like getting super unhealthy. It's no surprise, right?
Yep.
And I just feel that deeply. And to imagine being somebody who's in trouble with the law and feeling like, okay, these are the only people I know, but every time I hang out with them, I end back up in jail, and not being able to rip yourself out of that situation.
Yeah.
That is difficult.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I know is huge in that world when we talk about reentry and successful reintegration back into society is those, what we call pro-social connections, right?
Right.
You have to have people in your life that are going to demonstrate by example, or just simply by being, right, what it looks like to have a pro-social engagement with the community, and then see the joy and happiness that comes from, working a job and clearing a paycheck and, buying a home or whatever that metric is, whatever that thing is, but empowering them to do it on their own. Because that's really what it's got to take. None of us do those things that we do with somebody looking over our shoulder.
Right.
You look at, a lot of the folks we deal with, they end up on probation, right? So they get a probation officer who's looking over their shoulder. But at the end of the day, that probation is going to end at some point. And you're going to have to sustain whatever those new things are on your own. So if you're surrounding yourself with people that will not only help you in that journey or demonstrate what that looks like, they also builds in accountability, right? If you're not doing those things you're supposed to do, and you have people in your life that are willing to say, hey, Matt, you're not doing this thing. You're not, you should be doing more of this. And I'm going to keep checking in with you. I'm going to hold you accountable to that. Yeah. Chances are we'll probably do it. And so, that happens again by engaging in the best parts of our community, which there's lots of, right? This is a great community for people to get their feet back underneath them, to have a new lease on life, if you will, and right. Start over again. I've seen it. I've seen it happen all the time. And I've also seen it fail, right? But I know it's possible because I've seen it happen, and I want to see it happen more.
God bless it, man. Chris, we've talked about a lot of things.
A lot of stuff.
We definitely got away from bias, that's for sure. But again, I think all of this stems back to it, which is preconceived notions of what people are based on certain stimulus or what they're up to.
Definitely.
And, I understand that there's an argument for like, okay, but we can't walk through the world analyzing every piece of stimulus anew every single second. We would never even know how to order coffee at a coffee shop.
Nope.
Like we have to live life by analogy to some degree, and either observe how we've operated in previous similar situations or how other people operate to know, like, where do you stand in line to order your cup of coffee? That's the only, because you're like, oh, well, I usually stand near the cash register. I'll go do that.
Yeah.
Or like, okay, all these people are lined up here. So we need some of that analogy, some of that bias towards action, but obviously it can be used against us and soil our better judgment. So
definitely,
I appreciate that you guys are trying to flush it out and help people understand it.
Doing the best we can.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming in today. Is there anything we missed?
I don't think so.
You're the man. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.